Welcome to the Pitwall Panic podcast. We have had some great time in Japan today. Or really, this whole weekend has been a great time in Japan. It's been an interesting situation all the way around with things that we have seen from everything from Max's comments to Max avoiding people to you name it pretty much. It's been a wild ride this weekend. And I think this is going to kind of be the theme of the season at this point because we're going to get into this in a little bit. But you have Max saying that if things don't change, he might retire after 2026, which is kind of borderline throwing a fit to me. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So, first off, thank you to all the subscribers and all the followers. If you haven't subscribed yet, please give us a follow, give us a subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitch. We go live every Sunday at 8:30 Eastern Time. You can follow us on the old TikTok. And you can follow us on Twitter. I'm working on getting to having Instagram. Just haven't done it yet. But you can follow us on all these sites, all these places. Also, you can find us on Spotify. Sorry, went blank for a second there. I also want to get us on Apple at some point, or get the podcast on Apple. I just haven't had a chance to yet. Things have been kind of crazy in life, so a little behind on that one. Planning on getting there though. Just a matter of time, and please be patient with me on it. This week, it has been a roller coaster in F1. Fernando Alonso had a baby. We found out Lando put on his third battery. We see Oscar finally have his first start of the season. A lot has gone on in Japan. Jack Crawford got his first F1 practice of the season in. Y'all might see me coughing a little bit this week, like I was last week. Still having a few problems, but we're here. We'll make it work. All right, so I guess the first thing on the agenda, as we get into the race weekend, we'll get more into the news later, but, and I guess this is part of the news also, but dealing particularly with the cars and the driving. Lando has reportedly had his third battery put in the car. Earlier this week, if you follow on TikTok, you would have seen me post a video talking about how they determined that the battery that was in the McLaren was basically permanently damaged. The way they do F1 and really any racing series is you rotate parts out throughout the season. So the motor they ran this weekend, the engine, may not be the same as they run the next race, and they alternate them out. That way, if you have, 3 engines you can work with, you distribute the abuse, so to speak, on the engine evenly to try to make them last longer. You only get X amount for the season. Well, for the batteries, you get 3 batteries for the season. And Lando just put in his third. We're 3 races in, and he's put in his third. So what does that mean for us? Or for Lando, I should say. Well, I guess really for us as spectators also. There's a good possibility he's going to start taking some penalties this season. If after the third one, every single one gives you a penalty, and there's, let's see, after Bahrain and Saudi Arabia are taken off the calendar, there's 22 races instead of 24. We're 3 races down, so 19 more races in the season? and you have to make this battery last 19 races, but you couldn't make it last one. Yeah, that's not happening. He's going to catch some penalties somewhere. It's just a matter of where and when, and how significantly does it affect him. You know, is it going to be a weekend where he puts everything together, ends up on pole, and takes a grid penalty because he had to change out the battery? Like, what's, or is it going to be a weekend where everything went absolutely wrong in qualifying and he's near the back and takes that, so it's not that big of a deal? So, you know, that's where it's going to come into play biggest. I read somewhere there's multiple other drivers already on their third battery also. So, you know, we could see this as a potential issue for several people. It's just going to be interesting to see how that affects the season as this goes on. Who ends up running out of batteries first? Who is able to manage? So far, it seems like Ferrari has done the best on reliability from what I can tell. I know George has already dropped in more than one more than one battery unit. I'm not sure about Kimi. I think Oscar has. I think Max has. So, like, there's several drivers on the grid who have already started going through components, and we're only 3 races in. That's not a good sign. And I don't know if that's because of the regulation or if that's just regulation change so people are learning new things about these cars. It'll be interesting to see how it falls. Now, the other news that came out, and this is funny to me, is Max is boycotting a specific reporter. And the reason why is this reporter last year after Abu Dhabi asked Max if he regretted the incident that he had with George. Because if he hadn't have had that incident and finished the race, he would have been world champion for the 5th year. And because I guess he felt disrespected by this question. So he is now boycotting this reporter. And to the point that at Media Day in Japan, he would not say a word until this reporter left the room. After the reporter left the room, he went on with his interviews, he went on and did his stuff. And I just find that absolutely hilarious. Now, my takes on that, some people that I know have already heard this from me. I don't think that incident with George is what cost him the title. He raced 24 races in a season, not just one. And if you want to go based off of just accidents, there's also in Austria the dive bomb that Kimi made on lap 1 and took Max out. He didn't get points in either and was going to have a good race, or at least it looked like he was going to. And nobody goes, well, how do you feel about Kimi taking you out at Austria? Because that could have won you the championship. No, they focus on the incident with George. So I can kind of understand that frustration. I think it's funny that he's going to the degree of not allowing the reporter in the room when he's there and avoiding him at all cost. A little petty, a little childish, but it is Max after all. So are you really surprised by it? Because I'm not. I just think it's rather funny that he's going to these extremes. It also just kind of plays into who Max is as well. Getting back to my notes. Sorry, 1 second. So, and then now let's look at how the weekend as a whole is going. I think it's for Max, anyways. It's just not there. I know I made the comment that, Max is struggling in F1 and on Twitter, or not Twitter, on TikTok. And someone said it's not even just F1. I mean, he's struggling everywhere. And I'm like, it's different though. Yeah, at the Nürburgring, he got DSQ'd. Why am I buffering? What's going on? Okay, there we go. we know that at the Nürburgring, he 1 second. Sorry. Uh, we know that at the Nürburgring, he got DSQ'd for. Sorry if y'all heard Alexa in the background. I thing's always listening at the weirdest times. I feel like. He got DSQ'd for not having or using too many tires, but he won the race there. In F1, he is having a severe performance issue, and it is very clear this is a problem. It is very clear that either the Red Bull is very, very bad, or Max is having a really hard time adapting to these regulations. And it's hard to say which is which. Typically, you would say it's the regulations. But Hadjar is doing about how everybody in the second seat of that Red Bull does. So it's hard to say that. It's hard to say that the car just is bad. I don't know. It's really weird. Because even with a bad Red Bull, last year, prime example, terrible Red Bull car, he still won Japan. So I don't really know what's going on there. And he's struggling so badly that Pierre Gasly has now outqualified him 3 races in a row. Let that sink in for a second. 3 races in a row, Pierre Gasly has outqualified him. He has been beat by his teammate in qualifying, which, you know, you'll lose every now and then to your teammate. That's something that's going to happen. But you should be in far superior machinery going up against an Alpine with Red Bull. Nobody's going to argue otherwise on that. That you should be. Not that you are, that you should be. And this isn't a Max issue, because it's not just Max getting outqualified by Pierre Gasly. It's Max and Isaac Hadjar getting outqualified by Pierre Gasly in an Alpine. And I think that speaks volumes to where that car is at. To make matters worse, he was knocked out of Q2 by Lindblad. Last second, Lindblad comes through, puts down a great lap, knocks Max out. I say great lap. Good enough to get him up out of the drop zone for Q2 and make it into Q3. And I think that is very, very indicative of how bad this car really is if you're getting beat by the junior team. And it's not looking to get any better. When we look at the point standing, which we're going to get into more, the V-Carb's only 2 points behind Red Bull. Red Bull is slowly spiraling down the team the constructors' standings. And it is becoming more and more apparent that this is more and more of a problem. So now we kind of look at, I guess the other thing is, when we talk about Max has had bad qualifying sessions. Keep in mind that I think Max holds the record for the youngest Grand Prix win. He didn't get a pole position until like 3 years later, but had won like 7 races in that time. Max has always been a better racer than he has been a qualifier. That's not saying he hasn't gotten poles. That's just saying that when it comes time to race, even if he has a bad qualifying session, Max makes it work. He just does. And you look at Australia earlier this year, terrible qualifying, finished 6th in the race. You look at today, he went out P11 and finished 8th place. He's just not getting the positions back. I don't know if that's a product again of a car, if it's him, what it is. But he's not, he doesn't have that snappy racing that we were used to seeing from Max Verstappen. We see going into the race though, Kimmy pulls off, with the last bit of qualifying, Kimmy pulls off second pole of his career and of the season, which I think is amazing. We see that Kimmy is really putting in work. He is giving it to George even in the racing, which is nice to see that it's not just one driver's going to run away with it. It's very much so like McLaren was last season, and they're getting to get to fight. And as a Ferrari fan, that's great for us because that means that no one driver from Mercedes is just pulling away. I guess Kimi kind of is. He hasn't finished a race off the podium yet, but we'll see what comes. And then we see Oscar finally put this McLaren in a position that we kind of halfway expected from McLaren. I know earlier this season, in preseason testing and before preseason testing, I said that McLaren would not be fighting for title. And I 100% believed that. I didn't believe that McLaren would have this bad of a start, though. So this has caught me off guard, not going to lie there. But seeing him put the car in third, I mentioned that the only way that Mercedes or McLaren would have any shot at a constructor title is if if Oscar was a better driver in this regulation and in this car than Lando. So far, he's outqualified Lando 2 out of 3 times or 3 out of 3 times. I know he's outqualified him more. He's just had bad luck on the starting. And then we see him finish second today. So, I mean, maybe Oscar is really what McLaren needs. Lando didn't have a terrible race, but he didn't, fight for a podium. There was no argument that he was going to be fighting for a podium. So, I mean, it's interesting that now McLaren's in this fight as well. It's really the first time we've seen somebody other than Ferrari take a fight to Mercedes in qualifying or in the race. So it's just nice to kind of see that mix up as well. And the most interesting thing to me from qualifying, Alex Albon went out in Q1 yet again and he came over the radio and said, y'all said it's something about my driving style. That's why I can't, drive this car. I don't think it's my driving style. There's something wrong with this car. You can't tell me this is my driving style. Is he telling himself buckle down? Or does he genuinely believe that? I really hope that's just that insecure, I'm starting off bad, I need to figure this car out, and that's not genuinely what he's saying. And the reason I say that is Sainz isn't talking like that. And Sainz is actually putting this car probably in places it shouldn't be. Sainz has put this car in the points. He has 2 points for Williams, and the only 2 points that Williams has had this season. I know it's only 3 races in, but still. Albon finished last place. Let that sink in for a second. Albon finished last place, and that means he came in behind both Cadillacs, who have arguably had the worst pace on the grid. He came in behind Aston Martin and with Fernando Alonso, who can barely keep a car on the track because both cars have really just been awful. But he's going to blame the car, even though Carlos isn't back there with him. That says that he needs to adapt, in my opinion. The car is bad. I know the car is bad. There's a reason why when we did our preseason rankings, I said that the Williams would come in ninth place. I put Aston Martin last, Cadillac 10th, and then Williams. And the reason for that is because the car is bad. But when you're getting beat by Cadillac, who has the worst pace on the grid, and Aston Martin, who this is their first weekend they've even been able to finish a race, that's more than just a car issue. That is a driving issue when your teammate is not that slow. And that's why I kind of hope it's just he is in a panic mode and projecting instead of owning up to, oh crap, this is a problem. I need to just buckle down on this. I need to figure this car out. I need to spend more time in the sim. I need to do something. Who knows? We'll see though. I did say also earlier this season, I want to throw this out there, that I thought that Carlos would be better than Alex. I thought the only reason that Alex beat Carlos last season is because he had been in this car longer and already knew the car. Carlos was coming in and learning a car. That this year they'd both be on equal footing and Carlos would beat Alex, and so far, that's what's happening. How bad, I don't know, but if this is the mindset that he's having on let's blame everything on the car and nothing on me, when my teammate is putting the car in much better positions, it's going to be a long season for Alex Albon. Now, let's talk the race. And a lot happened in this race. So, off the start, we see both Mercedes just absolutely go nowhere. I know Kimi spun tires a little bit off the launch. And it's just like George didn't grip either. He just wasn't as bad as Kimi. So both of them dropped positions. Kimi went from P1 to P6. George went from P2 to P3 or P4. I think P4. Because I think it went Oscar, Charles, Lewis, and then George off the start, and then George got around Lewis pretty quickly. If I remember correctly. Pretty sure that's how it went. Either way, they both dropped drastically in their positions and had terrible starts. And then we just saw Oscar and Charles absolutely launch out of nowhere and go into P1 and P2, which was amazing to see off the start. And for the people saying that there's nothing going on with this Mercedes engine, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That's why Ferrari and them aren't complaining about it anymore. Yes, there is. And the reason they're not complaining anymore is because the FIA has already handled it and said, just give until mid-season break in July, or whenever they said, I think it was July. I can't remember if that's mid-season break or not. But they said, give us till, I think, July, and we're going to add this extra testing. We'll test at ambient, and we'll test at racing temperatures. And if your car is at 18.1, then you get disqualified. So what point is there to complain anymore? Everything that can be done has been done. So that argument makes no logical sense to me. But also, how can you tell me that Kimi looks like he is just straight up walking past Lewis and Lewis is standing still on a straight and say, yeah, that Mercedes has the same amount of power as everybody else on the grid? Nobody else is just walking off from Charles or Lewis, except for Mercedes. They can't do it in the corners because this car is just cornering better. But in the straight line speed, straight line power, nothing compares to the Mercedes. Why? Because they're cheating. They have that 18:1 compression ratio, and they're cheating, simply put. And I think we'll see a big difference later on. And, I mean, it's 3 weekends in a row, and Kimi has absolutely just decimated Lewis on the straightaways each time. And it might not have been Kimi in Australia and it was George, but like one of these Mercedes has absolutely just walked off and went around a Ferrari like they were standing still, even though Ferrari is clearly arguably the second best car on the grid right now. Make it make sense if they're not cheating. When no other car can do it. That's all I'm saying. Nobody else can do this except for Mercedes. Now, I know I'm going to offend the George fans. And honestly, I don't care. I am so tired of his whining and crying every single time something does not go his way. And I've been saying this for years. I know people will say, oh, you're just hating because now he's winning. I could honestly care less that he's winning. I just have never liked George. He's a punk. And plain and simple. If he sits here and he complains about Max being aggressive, but let's not forget that when I think it was him and Bottas that got in an accident, he gets out the car, walks over and punches Bottas in the head. Yeah, let's talk about aggression then, shall we? He's just a punk. And he wants to cry when things don't go his way. And I know people are going to say, well, that's what F1 drivers do. He goes above and beyond every other driver in this category, though. And it is just so annoying. He wants to sit here and come over the radio and cry and complain about, of course, there was a wreck after I pitted. Because he pits one lap and then Behrman wrecks. And we'll get into that in a second. I have news for you, George. Boo-hoo. That's racing. Crap happens. There's a little bit of luck involved in racing at times. This time you weren't lucky. No sense in getting on the radio crying about it. That just means focus up and get ready to race. I ran track and cross country in high school and in college and had teammates like this. And they wondered why things didn't always pan out for them. It's because you have the mental capacity of a wet paper bag. One thing goes wrong and your whole race is screwed. And I think that was very apparent in the second stint with George. Because all year, this Mercedes has just been dog walking everything. And he was just mentally fried. He couldn't even get around Charles, who was on older tires. And was complaining even more then. So I think his mental state was just shot. Because he's too worried about crying and complaining about everything else that he can't control. Focus on what you control and drive the car. That's what you get paid to do. Do that. Sorry for the little rant. I'm just so tired of George's crying. Now, getting into Oliver Behrman's wreck. The first thing I want to say is we are lucky that this happened at a track like Japan, not a street circuit like Monaco or Baku. I think that if this had happened at a street circuit like that, to where you don't have a gap between the track and the wall, we have another Roman Grosjean level accident, and Behrman possibly doesn't walk away from it. He pulled 50 Gs in this wreck, and that's after going through a gravel pit that slowed him down. Imagine if he just straight up hits a wall at the speed that he was carrying. There's a chance he doesn't walk away from that. He was already limping coming out of the car this time. I know F1 cars have got a lot safer, so there's a possibility that doesn't happen. But it would not have been a good sight. So that's the first and foremost. I'm glad he is safe. I'm glad he is okay. I hope he does not come back gun shy from this. He is really young. I think he's 19 or 20. Got a long career ahead of him. So I hope this does not bring him back gun shy. But getting into the other situations with this, I think this puts the FIA in a really tough spot and in a really bad situation. Carlos Sainz came out afterwards, said, the FIA ignored the drivers complaining about the safety issues behind the fact that you have to harvest a battery at some point, and if you're the car behind, you're absolutely screaming compared to the car in front of you that's harvesting. And that's just, it is. They were talking about in this accident, Oliver Behrman was pulling 90 kilometers an hour more than Franco Colapinto. And I know some people are blaming Colapinto, but it's not really his fault. He was on the racing line, yes. This is not qualifying, though. You don't get out the way just because you're slower than the person behind you. In this case, because of battery. Unless there's a blue flag because you're getting lapped, you defend that position. That's what racing is. Get around me. I'm not giving it up to you. Now, obviously, there's times where it's just not your fight and you need to let it go. Right now, it's his fight. Haas and Alpine are right there together in the standings. That is his fight. Stay ahead of Behrman. And also, if the FIA thought it was his fault, there would have been an investigation. They didn't even look at it. And the reason I say 100% there would have been an investigation. Oliver Behrman got out of that car and couldn't even walk. He had to sit back down because I think it was his knee was hurting so bad. With that level of accident, they're going to investigate on what caused this. But they didn't. So the people that just want to hate on Colapinto, please think rationally on this. We do not need, how do I say this with decorum? Or people sending threats because, oh, you almost really injured another driver. This was not his fault. And that is a whole nother issue in itself. And the threats that Kimi has gotten, the threats that Duhan got, the threats that I think Ocon received, because that was a big part of the news. It's racing. These are adults. Quit acting like children. Quit threatening them every single time something goes sideways. You're going 200 miles an hour. You can't control everything. And that does not mean send a death threat to somebody just because your favorite driver got in an accident with them. That's first and foremost. Sorry. But I don't see how you can possibly blame Colapinto for this when he's just driving and doing what he's paid to do. It is definitely indicative of an issue with this battery management system. You cannot have another car on track pulling 90 kilometers an hour faster than the car ahead of them. If this continues, we will see more accidents like this and we'll see drivers start getting hurt. Imagine this is, trying to think of another track where you can possibly pull. So imagine this is Monza. And, right now that has the fastest lap speed in history, record-wise. Imagine you're pulling those speeds and you fly up on somebody and you can't get out the way and you rear-end them. That's going to be a major issue. And I think we got lucky at Japan that it happened where it did. Because while, yes, Behrman did wreck, he had the opportunity to react and get out of the way instead of just plowing into the rear end of Franco Colapinto. So that is the bright side there. Something has to be done, though. Because, like I said earlier, he pulled 50 Gs going into this wall. Any street circuit, it would have been probably worse. You think about Castle at Baku. If he has to snatch like that last second because he's not expecting Colapinto to be going that slow all of a sudden because he's harvesting, and he runs into the wall head on at Castle on Baku, that's a really bad day and a really bad time. And we might be having a different conversation right now. So they have to do something about this. Now, moving past the incident, and kind of jumping back at George. He mentioned after the race in a press conference that he thinks that if there was no safety car, he would have won this race. No, George was never winning this race. And I think it is very apparent that this was always Oscar or Kimi's race to win. And honestly, I think Kimi wins this race even if there is no caution. I think Kimi was absolutely blistering fast compared to everybody else. And it wasn't just, let me put down one fast lap. He was consistently fast. Kimi won with almost a 14-second gap between him and Oscar Piastri in second place. George was almost 16 seconds behind Kimi, but he still thinks that he would have won this race. No. I just don't see it. Not only that, George couldn't even get around Charles, and Charles is on older tires. Kimi would have been on fresher tires because he was going to pit after George anyways. So he would have probably done the extend properly. Well, and we'll get into that more in a second on the extending properly. When we look at the first stint, Oscar undercut George. And if you can't undercut or go in at the same time, in this situation, you want to extend. Especially with as much pace as Oscar had, more than likely George was not going to come out in front of him. So you want to extend. And what you do when you're extending is, I'm going to try to go 10 to 15 laps longer. That's just an arbitrary number. I don't know how far they would have gone. But you're going to try to do more laps, drastically more laps, so that whenever you pit, as long as you haven't shot yourself in the foot going too long, later in the race, you're going to have fresher tires. Later in the race, when it matters most, you're going to have more grip. George pitted 3 laps after Oscar because of the pressure Kimi was putting on him. And you might go, well, he did extend by 3 laps. But when you're talking hard tires, 3 laps is nothing. 3 laps makes no difference at all. So he didn't even extend properly because he goes, guys, I think I'm losing too much time on these tires. Because every single lap of those 3 laps, Kimi was taking chunks out of that gap. But you're trying to tell me he thinks that he could have won that race without the safety car. No. And the reason why is Kimi had the pace to continue even longer and extend even further. He only pit because there was a safety car. And unlike Ferrari, who doesn't pit under virtual safety cars for some reason, hint, hint, Australia, Mercedes didn't do that. They actually pit him, and he came out ahead of Oscar and just absolutely ran away from there. The pace that Kimi had, George was never beating. George is coping so hard it's not even funny. And of course he's going to cry and complain because that's what George does. So if he was chewing, and to further that, if he was chewing that kind of time out of George with equally worn tires, what would have happened whenever he fully extended? Say he goes 10 laps longer and has that much fresher tires later in the race. How was George going to keep him off? Just wasn't. He simply wasn't. They were on basically equally worn tires. He was on 1 lap older hards, and he was still pulling fastest laps of the race. So how was George going to keep him off? He wasn't. Now, the one thing that I do think it's interesting is sorry. In the past, Charles has been arguably one of the best qualifiers we've seen on the grid. If he had issues on the weekend, it was typically in the race, whether that be Ferrari's strategy, whether that just be him making mistakes, or whatever the case may be, just not having race pace. It was always in the race. But this year, and Charles has been very vocal about this, Charles has not been able to figure out how to qualify in this car to save his life. He has struggled in qualifying. But whenever it comes to the race, he's an absolute unit and puts in some of the best work on the grid. And it's just a matter of time before he wins a race. I honestly think that when they come back from this long break and they figure out these cars better and they do more upgrades, Charles is going to be a real contender for a win. Just the way that it went down today in Japan, it's very apparent it's just a matter of time. But getting back towards the Max stuff, you know, we've already established that Pierre outqualified both Red Bulls. We established that Lindblad outqualified both Red Bulls. The other interesting thing here is, granted, they did outqualify, so Pierre beating both Red Bulls is not that surprising, but he did it again for a 3rd time. And not only that, it makes you question, Since we're talking about the hypotheticals where George said he thinks he would have won the race, I don't see it, but since we're going there, if Lindblad doesn't pit, I think it was 2 laps before Behrman's accident, and Max pitted after the accident, just like Kimi, does Lindblad beat Max? And the reason that's such a big deal is if Lindblad beats Max, that means you have 2 V-carbs in the points and only 1 Red Bull. And that 1 Red Bull would have been in 9th place. So he would have only gotten 2 points. And say he's only 1 position ahead of Max. If he's in 8th place, that's, 3 points? And then the 1 point for Lawson, because he would have been in 10th place. That's 4 points. They're only 2 points behind. They'd have been 2 points ahead of Red Bull in the junior team. That car is so bad that the junior team is putting that kind of pressure on them. You're talking about a rookie could have potentially beat the 4-time world champion because of how bad that car is. Then the other part of this is if you're Yuki, I know this podcast specifically and many others have been big ambassadors, I guess you could say, big fans of Yuki, and we were doing the whole Justice for Yuki thing. If you're Yuki, are you happy you're not in this car? This car is so bad. If I'm Yuki, I'm going, hey, kick Lawson or Lindblad out of that car and put me in there. I don't want to be in this car. That's for sure. I don't want to be in this car. Or going to any other team on the grid, and please give me a spot in your car. Just not that Red Bull. He's already got bit by it once, and it seems to be even worse this year. So why would he want to be there now? I don't know. I think that, earlier this year, I was saying they should have given him one more season in the Red Bull because it's a new regulation. It's a new car. Now you don't have Christian Horner there, who's obviously favoring Max to this extreme that it's detrimental to the other drivers because look how long it took you to get an upgrade. I think that this ultimately might have saved his career if he does get another spot, because if he'd been in this Red Bull this year, you go, well, it's 2 years in a row you've had bad seasons. So why do you deserve a seat? Well, he dodged that bullet, it seems like. This might have been the best thing for Yuki, because it's not just Isaac struggling, it's also Max. Now, talking struggling, and I think this is very interesting and brings up a lot of question marks. Lewis said afterwards in his press conference that this race this weekend was pretty terrible. This is the first time we've seen anything negative racing-wise since the season has started out of Lewis. He enjoyed Australia. He enjoyed China. The battle with Charles, he said that was some of the most fun he's had in years racing. And he said that he was confused and didn't know why. He just didn't have any power, specifically in the second stint. And wonders if there was an issue with the car, like what was going on. And I think that's very interesting because Lewis has been fighting for podiums every race, if he wasn't already on the podium. Australia last lap, he's given it to Charles, and Charles doesn't just walk away with the podium. He has to actually drive the car to get the podium. Then we see in the sprint, he takes the podium from Charles. And then again in China, they're battling just as hard. Or no, I'm sorry. Charles got the sprint podium. Lewis got the Grand Prix podium. And they're battling just as hard every single race. They're not just giving it up. But this time, it just kind of seemed like Lewis was just there that second stint. He wasn't really able to take the fight to Charles this time. And he didn't really get to fight Lando too hard this time. Like he did, but it's not like we've seen the last 2 weekends. So, was there an issue with the car? If there was, would George have been even further down off the podium? I mean, he finished 4th today. If Lewis had a car of the same quality of Charles, if he was having issues, would that have put George in 5th? interesting to think about. And it makes it even funnier because I would have died and loved to have seen George even further down off the grid as much as he was crying in this race. So now let's kind of look at team standings because this is getting interesting. Everybody, when the season started, said 1 and 2 interchangeably was going to be Mercedes and Ferrari, depending on who you talk to. That was the two that were named for those two positions. Then it was going to be either McLaren or Red Bull, interchangeably. Most people were saying McLaren at number 3 because everybody thought Isaac Hadjar was going to, second seat. He's going to struggle. Max is going to do the very Max thing to do and just go out there and dominate as best he can in that car and really put up the points, and just hasn't. We have not seen that since week 1 of this season. And even then, we didn't see that. So, McLaren has made a big jump point-wise significantly. Last week, they were 1 point ahead of Haas in 3rd place, Haas being in 4th place. They're now 30 points ahead of Haas because, you have Oscar on the podium in 2nd place. You have Lando in 5th place. So, that's good points. And Haas had Ocon in 10th. And obviously, Ollie Behrman did not finish the race because of his accident. So, they have a 30-point gap now. But if you're McLaren, that is still not comfortable. With the reliability issues you've had all season, that is not comfortable and that is not good enough. If you have one race with another double DNS, that's out the window. The way Oliver Behrman's been driving, that 30-point gap is gone. He puts that car in 4th or 5th place. And then Ocon just, does what Ocon does and gets in the lower end of the points at best. That gap is gone. You're back to a 2-point gap, 3-point gap, maybe 10-point gap. And that's gone in a weekend. That's really not that much. And that's why I've been saying Ferrari's still in this fight with Mercedes. They haven't got away yet. Because it's kind of, let me see. I had the team standings pulled up right now. Okay, well, Mercedes is starting to pull away a little bit more. They're got like a 40-point gap, 45-point gap. So, they're starting to get a bigger gap on Ferrari. But, still, that's just 2 weekends where things go terribly wrong for Mercedes and things go absolutely phenomenal for Ferrari. And that gap is closed. McLaren and Haas, it's not even a full 30-point gap. And that can be gone in a weekend. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is Alpine is currently sitting in 5th place. Now, if you watched our episode where we were putting our preseason rankings in, I said I think that I said Haas would be 5th place because, again, I expected McLaren to be 3rd, Red Bull to be 4th, and I said Alpine was 6th. And there was some people that were like, there's no way because it's Alpine. That won't happen. They got Colapinto that's going to hold them back. That's not going to happen. They're sitting in 5th place right now, in front of a Red Bull that has no answers for why their car is so bad. And Max can't figure out how to drive this car. The person that we expected to drag this team ahead and keep this team in 4th is absolutely struggling. Alpine and Red Bull are tied in points with 16 points. But Alpine is in 5th, Red Bull in 6th. Now let's sink in for a second. The team that the team that last year was in 10th place and only had a handful of points, had a driver that had 0 points, had technically 2 different drivers that drove with them that had 0 points, is now sitting in 5th place with 16 points, 3 races in. They have made such a turnaround, and it's crazy. And I wonder if it's because they're running that Mercedes power unit instead of Renault. But where is Haas and Alpine going to finish? You know, everybody's been saying, well, it's early in the season. It's early in the season. Arguably, there's only one team behind them that shouldn't be behind them. And they don't know how to fix the car. The bigger question is, how far down the standings does Red Bull fall before they get it figured out? You have your junior program who's only 2 points behind you. Then you have Audi with 2 points, Williams with 2 points. Arguably, I don't see Audi passing Red Bull because they're a brand new car. Or a brand new team. They're trying to figure their stuff out. They just had Jonathan Wheatley step out for personal reasons. Everybody thought he was going to Aston Martin, but that didn't happen this weekend. Could it still happen? Yes, but it didn't happen this weekend, so it makes you question things. And then you have Williams, where the car is overweight and just absolutely struggling. I want to say it was Williams they were talking about, that the weight distribution is wrong. So when they go through corners, they have one tire that's not on the ground, which is a big issue for grip. Granted, the Red Bull is overweight also, so maybe if they shed some weight, they fix some issues. But so obviously, Audi and Williams isn't going to really take it to Red Bull unless things get really, really bad and them two figure out something. Cadillac can't find pace, so that ain't happening. And Aston Martin, this is the first weekend that they've had at least one car finish a race. So I don't see those two changing. Now, if Aston Martin figures out the car, figures out its issues, I think it could work its way up to 8th, maybe? I mean, you're only 2 points out of 8th, so figure out your stuff and take a 9th place finish, and you've already covered that gap. Which Fernando Alonso can do. Now, Fernando Alonso finished the race. Lance Stroll did not. I didn't look into why. I just assume it's because the car is trash, because that's been the reason why every other time. And Fernando Alonso didn't run FP1 because, as we know, he came in late after having the baby. And they let Crawford run FP1. Did him not running FP1 help him have better longevity in the race is the question. Did that give his hands enough rest to make that big of a difference? If so, that's kind of crazy. Or are they starting to figure out, the issues the car has? Obviously, it's not going to be perfect because you're not going to go from having a rusty, beat up piece of junk one day to having this pristine supercar the next day. And that's the same thing with F1. You're not going to have everything falling apart one second and then have everything figured out the next. Could they have made improvements? It's possible. Could it just be that Fernando Alonso was having a great weekend because he just had his first child? That's possible. There's no real telling, and we'll see after this extended break. But it's something to think about. It's something to question. Going back to how far does Red Bull fall? I see them possibly dropping down as far as 7th place. And maybe Audi puts more together once they get a solidified team principal and have less distractions going on, in which case Red Bull maybe falls to 8th place. And when was the last time that we saw Red Bull that far down? That just shows the state they're in. Now, just before the podcast, I was scrolling through news and stuff, and take this with a grain of salt because it was Twitter. But there's reports that Max Verstappen is talking about at the end of 2026 possibly retiring if things don't get better. If this is true, it's going to be one of two things. Either Max is just being a baby, the first time he's had any kind of real difficulties with the car, he decides to cut and run. And I say that because, yes, that car was terrible last year, but he finished 2 points out of the championship, or out of the title. So, yeah, that was bad. But this is way worse. This is arguably far worse. I'm going to pull up the driver standings real quick. At this point, Max Verstappen is 9th place in the drivers. You have both Pierre Gasly and Oliver Bearman ahead of Max. And obviously Kimi Antonelli. Who is, only in his second season. Oliver Bearman's only in his second season and in a Haas. And then Pierre Gasly is only in his second season. Or not in his second season. He's in a Alpine. One of the worst constructors, arguably, in my opinion, on the grid, but that's because of Briatore and some other stuff. I just think that they are a very toxic outfit, and they're still managing to put a car ahead of Max Verstappen, which is kind of crazy. So he's talking about possibly leaving F1. Do I think he'll quit racing if he does do this? Absolutely not. He'll just go into endurance racing. But it's crazy to think about. Is he just throwing a temper tantrum because things aren't going his way? Is it the regs are so bad and he's been complaining about them and it's not getting any better? Is it the car at Red Bull is so bad that he doesn't see how they can dig this car out of the hole that it's in during this regulation? Like, what is it? If it is simply he doesn't think the Red Bull can get out of the hole it's in, he could try to go to another team. I'd argue that he might be able to finagle his way into Mercedes. And I'm not going to say who I think would get dropped because people would call me crazy. But I think Toto would let someone go and take Max in. I honestly think he would. I think it's his driving style does not fit this regulation, and he can't figure it out. And Max doesn't know how to handle that. Max is the same guy that went into endurance racing and figured that out in an instant. Max is the same guy that skipped F2 and jumped from F3 to F1 and figured it out pretty quick. Max is the same guy that races in many different divisions on sim racing and figures those cars out. He cannot seem to figure this out, and I wonder if that's what's causing this. I'm just going to retire at the end of 26. Who knows? Only time will tell. And again, it might not even be legit because it came from Twitter, and I haven't seen it anywhere else. Granted, if it got said after the Japanese Grand Prix, no one's had time to report on it yet. But that's where I saw it. So take it with a grain of salt. I think that Japan, though, as far as an overall, was a great way to go out before our unexpected extended break. And I say unexpected because there were supposed to be 2 races here. Not going to have. So I think that we had a lot of good battles. We had a lot of interesting things happen. I think that if you're going to have a major incident like Bearman's, where luckily he was not too injured and is able to walk away from it, there was no fractures according to the x-rays or MRIs, now was the best time to have that happen because now the FIA has, I think it's 4 weeks to figure out what they're going to do about it. So all in all, I know they're trying to work on the energy deployment because they changed things up for qualifying. I think this proves that they have to do more. I am a big believer that we should go back to more combustion engine and less energy, and this would have prevented this in the first place anyways. So we'll see what happens. If you're not already following the podcast on YouTube, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. It'd be greatly appreciated. If you're not following on TikTok and you see this, please go give us a follow over there. I try to make news updates as the week goes on so that it's not kind of late in the week when I go over it here in the podcast, and then go deeper into it if I can. If it's not like on a Monday came out, and then I try to go deeper on it on Sunday. So, follow us over there. Follow me on Twitter, where I'm getting most of this news from, and I'll retweet stuff and also give my opinions and ask some questions over there. And then obviously follow us on Twitch if you watch us live, and you'll get the notifications when we go live. With that being said, though, I hope you'll have a great week, and we'll see y'all next week.